Before we get started, make sure to subscribe to the channel and like this video. That way, you'll always stay connected to our stories and never miss the next adventure. The thing about digging up dead civilizations is that they never leave instruction manuals. No, seriously, not once in the entire history of galactic archaeology has anyone found a convenient stone tablet that says, "Hey, future idiots, here's how you open our stuff without dying horribly." Deacon had been on Aldaris 9 for 8 months now, which was approximately 6 months longer than his patients typically lasted. The planet was a dust-choked nightmare of orange skies and ruins that refused to give up their secrets without a fight. But the pay was exceptional, the mystery was genuine, and honestly, where else was a human linguist going to find work translating languages that died out before his species learned to bang rocks together? "I am detecting another false threshold," Maltharek announced, his 6 arms gesturing at various scanning devices with the kind of enthusiasm usually reserved for watching paint dry. The Ondari scholar stood nearly 8 feet tall, his chitinous blue-gray exoskeleton gleaming dully in the harsh afternoon light. "This is the 19th such disappointment this month." 21st, Deacon corrected, not looking up from the stone fragment he was examining. "You're forgetting last Tuesday's doubleheader of architectural blue balls." "I do not understand why you insist on such crude terminology." "Because architectural blue balls is objectively funny, and also because I've been staring at rocks for 8 months and I'm losing my mind." Deacon set down the fragment and stretched, his back popping in 3 distinct places. At 31, he was too young to feel this old, but fieldwork had a way of aging you in dog years. The dig site sprawled across what used to be a city, back when the architects still existed to build cities. That was 10,000 years ago, give or take a few centuries. The architects themselves remained one of the galaxy's greatest mysteries, a civilization so advanced they'd apparently decided to just vanish one day, leaving behind nothing but empty buildings and a whole lot of questions that kept archaeologists employed. Maltharek clicked his mandibles in what Deacon had learned to recognize as mild irritation. The survey data indicated a 93% probability of significant structural findings in grid section Delta 6. The geological composition suggests, "Mal, buddy, my friend, my overly literal colleague," Deacon interrupted, wiping dust off his pants in a gesture that accomplished absolutely nothing. "The survey data has had a 93% probability of being completely wrong about everything since we got here. At this point, I'd trust a coin flip more than I'd trust that survey." Statistical variance is to be expected in archaeological. The ground shook. Not a gentle tremor, not the kind of shift you could dismiss as wind or settling foundations. This was a proper, teeth-rattling shake that sent Deacon stumbling sideways and knocked over half of Maltharek's scanning equipment. "Okay," Deacon said, once the world had stopped trying to throw him off it. "That's new." Maltharek had gone completely still, which was unnerving because the Ondari were not a still people. All 6 of his arms hung frozen in mid-gesture, his sensory stalks rigid with attention. The seismic sensors are indicating a cavity collapse, bearing 226 degrees, distance approximately 60 meters. Translation: something big just opened up. That is not an accurate translation of... But Deacon was already moving, scrambling over rubble toward the dust cloud rising from the northeast section of the dig site. Behind him, he could hear Maltharek making distressed clicking sounds and muttering about proper excavation protocols, but the Ondari was following anyway, because for all his by-the-book attitude, he was just as curious as Deacon was. They rounded the corner of what used to be some kind of civic building and stopped dead. Where there had been solid bedrock that morning, there was now a hole. Not a crack, not a sinkhole, but a perfect rectangular opening in the ground, roughly 10 meters on each side, descending into darkness that their portable lights couldn't quite penetrate. "Well," Deacon said, peering over the edge, "this is either the best thing that's ever happened to us, or we're about to become a cautionary tale. I am filing an immediate report with the expedition coordinator," Maltharek said, already manipulating his comm device with 2 of his hands while the other 4 deployed various scanning tools. "This requires a full team assessment before any exploration is attempted." "Or," Deacon said slowly, watching the way light seemed to bend at the edge of the opening, like it was being pulled down into the darkness, "we could take a quick look now and be heroes. You know, document the initial findings. Very professional. Very by the book." "That is the opposite of by the book." "Is it, though? Is it really?" Maltharek fixed him with a look that didn't need translation across species. It clearly said, "Yes, you idiot, it really is." But he was also extending a climbing line into the hole, so his commitment to protocol was apparently as flexible as Deacon's when properly motivated. The descent took 15 minutes of careful rappelling, and with every meter they dropped, Deacon felt the temperature change. It got colder, yes, but there was something else, a kind of pressure in the air that made his ears pop and his skin prickle. The walls of the shaft were smooth, too smooth to be natural, and they had that same light-bending quality that made them hard to focus on. "Architectural composition is consistent with architect construction techniques," Maltharek reported, his voice taking on the clinical tone he used when he was trying not to be excited. "Material analysis suggests this structure predates the surface ruins by at least 2,000 years. So this is old. Got it?" They touched. Bottom. And Deacon had to pause to let his eyes adjust. Except adjusting didn't help, because the darkness here wasn't natural darkness. It was thick, almost textured, like the absence of light had weight. Then Maltharek activated his high-intensity lamps, and Deacon forgot how to breathe. The chamber was massive, easily 100 meters across, with a ceiling that soared up into shadows even the lamps couldn't reach. But that wasn't what stopped Deacon's brain. What stopped his brain was the door. It wasn't a door in any conventional sense. It was a wall of that same light-bending material, but this wall was alive with patterns. Geometric shapes flowed across its surface like oil on water, constantly shifting, never quite repeating. And it was humming, a deep subsonic vibration that Deacon felt in his chest more than heard with his ears. "I am detecting active power systems," Maltharek whispered. And when was the last time Deacon had heard him whisper? "This facility is not dormant. It is operational." After 10,000 years? Deacon moved closer, drawn by something he couldn't name. The patterns on the door seemed to react to his approach, the flow becoming faster, more agitated. "That's not possible." "I concur, yet the evidence suggests otherwise." Deacon reached out, not quite touching the surface, and the patterns converged on his hand like iron filings to a magnet. Up close, he could see that the shapes weren't random at all. They were structured, organized, following rules that his brain recognized even if he couldn't articulate them. "Mal," he said quietly, "I think this is language." "That is an extraordinary claim." "Yeah, well, I'm an extraordinary linguist." Deacon pulled out his portable scanner and started recording, capturing the flow of patterns. "Look at the repetition intervals, the way certain shapes always precede others. This isn't decoration, it's communication." He spent the next 20 minutes documenting everything, occasionally muttering to himself about phonetic structures and symbolic grammar, while Maltharek conducted his own scans of the chamber. The Ondari's initial report to the expedition coordinator had apparently gone unanswered, which wasn't unusual given the communication lag from their remote location, but Deacon could see it was making his colleague nervous. "We should return to the surface," Maltharek said finally. "Establish a proper research protocol. Return with appropriate equipment and personnel." "Just 5 more minutes?" "You said that 20 minutes ago." "This time I mean it." Deacon was staring at a sequence of patterns that kept repeating, a cluster of shapes that appeared every 36 seconds like clockwork. "There's a pattern here, a key sequence. If I can just figure out the phonetic mapping." "Deacon, we do not even know if this construct is safe." As if in answer, the door pulsed, a wave of light that washed over both of them and made Deacon's teeth ache. Maltharek made a high-pitched alarm sound and grabbed Deacon with 4 arms, trying to pull him back. "Wait! Wait!" Deacon insisted, planting his feet. "That was a response. It reacted to something." "Yes, and I would prefer not to learn what it reacts to next." But Deacon was already running through the possibilities in his head. The architects had been gone for 10,000 years. This facility had been sealed for at least that long. What could possibly make it react now? Unless it had been waiting. The thought should have been terrifying. Instead, it was electrifying. "The phonetic structure," Deacon said, more to himself than to Maltharek. "It's optimized for a specific frequency range. That's why it seemed familiar. It's in the same range as human vocal cords. That is statistically improbable, bordering on impossible." "Yeah, no kidding. But look at the waveform analysis. See how the patterns compress and expand? That's modulation. That's how you encode information in sound. This thing is designed to respond to spoken language." Maltharek's sensory stalks went rigid. "You cannot possibly be suggesting—" "I'm absolutely suggesting." Deacon turned back to the door, his heart hammering. This was insane. This was career-endingly stupid. This was also why he'd gotten into xenolinguistics in the first place. He cleared his throat, feeling ridiculous, and spoke to the pattern. "Hello?" The word came out rougher than he'd intended, his voice hoarse from dust and nerves. Nothing happened for a long moment, and Deacon felt a wash of relief mixed with disappointment. Then the door sang. That was the only way to describe it. The patterns suddenly aligned, the random flow becoming structured, purposeful, and the subsonic hum resolved into something that wasn't quite music, but wasn't quite not music either. It was beautiful and alien and utterly terrifying. And then the door opened. Not all the way, just enough to show darkness beyond, deeper and more profound than the darkness they'd already found. But in that darkness, something was glowing, a faint blue light that pulsed in time with Deacon's racing heartbeat. "Okay," Deacon said, his voice barely above a whisper. So that worked. Maltharek had gone completely silent, all 6 arms hanging limp at his sides. From somewhere in the darkness beyond the door, a sound emerged. It was mechanical and ancient, like vast gears turning after millennia of stillness. And underneath it, barely audible, was something that sounded like a voice. No, not a voice. A recording. The last command, logged into the vault's memory 10,000 years ago, when the architects still walked their cities and humans were still figuring out fire. And somehow, impossibly, Deacon's voice had matched the pattern. The recording played on a loop, each repetition sending chills down Deacon's spine. It wasn't words, exactly. More like the impression of words, a voice that had been compressed and stored in a format his brain didn't quite know how to process. But underneath the alien modulation, there was something unmistakably familiar about the cadence, the rhythm. It sounded human. "This is not possible," Maltharek said, breaking his silence. He'd recovered from his shock enough to start scanning again, though his hands were shaking. Humans achieved space travel 300 years ago. The architects vanished 10 millennia before that. There is no scenario in which these timelines intersect. And yet, Deacon gestured at the open door, at the blue light pulsing in the darkness beyond. "Here we are, breaking the laws of temporal causality like it's our job. Causality cannot be broken. Tell that to the door that just opened because I said hello." The blue light was getting brighter, resolving into distinct shapes. Holographic projections, Deacon realized, ancient display technology activating after an impossibly long sleep. The shapes coalesced into symbols, into script, into a language that made his head hurt to look at, because part of him recognized it, even though he'd never seen it before in his life. "I need to get closer," Deacon said, already moving toward the doorway. Maltharek grabbed him with 2 arms, the other 4 still clutching scanning equipment. "Absolutely not. We have no information about the interior environment. There could be radiation, biological hazards, structural instability, or answers." Deacon pulled free, not aggressively, just persistent. "Look, I know this is insane. I know we should wait for backup and proper protocols and all that sensible stuff. But Mal, when are we ever going to get another chance like this? When is anyone?" The Ondari scholar made a sound like grinding gravel, which Deacon had learned meant he was wrestling with a decision. Finally, Maltharek's sensory stalks drooped in resignation. "If we die, I am filing a posthumous complaint about your methodology." "Fair enough." They crossed the threshold together, and immediately the air changed. It wasn't just cooler, it was different, recycled and filtered through systems that had been running since before human civilization existed. The blue light came from panels embedded in the walls, creating a pathway deeper into the facility. "Atmosphere is breathable," Maltharek reported, his voice tight. "In fact, it is optimized for oxygen-breathing species. Pressure is slightly elevated, but within tolerance." "Of course it is," Deacon muttered, "because apparently this place was waiting for visitors." The corridor opened into an antechamber, and both of them stopped dead. The space was pristine, utterly untouched by time. No dust, no decay, no signs of age. Equipment lined the walls, technology so advanced it made their own scanning devices look like Stone Age tools, and covering every surface was script, the same flowing symbols from the door, but here they were static, carved, or printed into the walls with impossible precision. "This is a research facility," Maltharek breathed, "or a library, or something beyond our frame of reference entirely." Deacon was already at the nearest wall, his fingers hovering over the symbols without quite touching. "It's a repository. Look at the organizational structure. These aren't random inscriptions. They're indexed, categorized." He pulled out his scanner and started recording, his hands moving on autopilot while his brain tried to process what he was seeing. This is knowledge. This is everything they knew. A new hologram flickered to life in the center of the chamber, larger and more complex than the others. It showed a 3-dimensional star map, but not just any map. This one had temporal markers, showing the positions of stars not as they were now, but as they had been, cycling backward through time. 10,000 years ago, the map showed a thriving civilization spread across 30 star systems. Then, abruptly, it showed nothing. "They didn't just leave," Deacon said quietly. "They ended. All at once. everywhere like someone flipped a switch. Maltharek was manipulating the hologram with two of his hands, zooming into different sections. No signs of warfare, no environmental collapse markers, no evidence of disease vectors capable of species-wide extinction. His voice was shaking. They simply stopped existing. Yeah, that's not ominous at all. The hologram shifted again, responding to something, and suddenly they were looking at an architect. At least, Deacon assumed it was an architect. He'd never actually seen one before because nobody had. The figure was humanoid, unsettlingly so, with 2 arms, 2 legs, and a body structure that could have passed for human if you squinted and didn't look too closely at the proportions. The recorded architect began speaking, and the facility's translation systems kicked in, rendering the ancient language into something Deacon's implant could process. The voice was calm, measured, resigned. If you are hearing this, then our gambit succeeded. You exist, you found us, and you carry within your biology the key we designed. Maltharek made a choking sound. Designed? Deacon couldn't speak. His throat had closed up, his mind racing through implications he didn't want to accept. The recording continued. We knew our time was ending. The cause is irrelevant now, lost to the ages we hoped you would inherit. What matters is what we did in our final years. We scattered genetic templates across the galaxy, seeded worlds with the potential for intelligence, for consciousness, for the specific vocal and biological traits necessary to access what we left behind. No, Deacon whispered. No, no, no. Humanity was not an accident. You were an experiment, a solution, a vessel. The hologram zoomed in on the architect's face, and Deacon could see something in those alien features that made his stomach turn. It was satisfaction, pride. This facility contains our greatest achievement. The consciousness matrices hold 10,000 of our finest, minds preserved and waiting. When you speak the activation sequence, when your biology confirms the pattern match, the transfer protocol will initiate. We will live again in bodies designed to host us. We will continue. We will survive. The recording ended, and the antechamber fell silent, except for the hum of ancient machinery. Maltharek turned to look at Deacon, and for the first time since they'd met, the Ondari scholar looked genuinely frightened. They created your species to steal your bodies. Deacon laughed, a harsh, bitter sound that echoed off the pristine walls. 10,000 years of human history. Every struggle, every triumph, every person who ever lived. And we're just, what, spare parts? A biological storage solution? He wanted to rage, to scream, to smash something. Instead, he stood very still and stared at the place where the hologram had been. That, he said slowly, is insulting even by ancient alien standards. The worst part wasn't the revelation itself. The worst part was how much sense it made. Deacon sank down against the wall, his legs suddenly unable to support his weight. All those debates about human exceptionalism, why we evolved so fast compared to other species, why our vocal range is so weirdly specific. He laughed again, the sound cracking at the edges. Turns out we're not exceptional. We're manufactured. Maltharek had gone very quiet. His sensory stalks twitching in a pattern Deacon had learned meant deep thought. This explains certain anomalies in human genetic history. The acceleration periods, the lack of transitional fossil evidence in key developmental windows. Oh, good. I'm glad my existential crisis is solving academic mysteries for you. I did not mean... Maltharek stopped, clicking his mandibles in frustration. Deacon, I am attempting to process information that fundamentally restructures our understanding of galactic history. Please allow me a moment to be clinical about it before I join you in panic. That was fair, actually. Deacon took a breath, then another, forcing his brain back into analytical mode. Panic could wait. Right now, they needed to think. Okay, he said, pushing himself back to his feet. Okay, so the architects designed humanity to be compatible with their consciousness transfer technology. That's horrifying, but it's also information. What else did that recording say? That 10,000 of their minds are stored here, waiting for activation. Maltharek gestured at the chamber around them with all 6 arms. And that your voice, your biology, serves as the activation key. Right. So the question is, where are these consciousness matrices? Because I don't see 10,000 storage units in this room. As if responding to his words, new holograms appeared, displaying a schematic of the facility. It was vast, extending deep into the planet's crust, with the antechamber they currently occupied representing barely a fraction of the total structure. And at the center, Tiru, marked in pulsing red, was a chamber labeled in script that Deacon's implant translated simply as archive. That's either where we need to go or where we absolutely should not go, Deacon said. I'm genuinely not sure which. We should contact the expedition coordinator immediately, Maltharek said, but he was already studying the schematic, tracing paths with 2 of his hands. This discovery requires immediate escalation to the Galactic Council. The implications for human sovereignty alone are terrifying, yeah. But Mal, if we leave now, how long before someone else comes back? Someone who maybe doesn't care about human sovereignty? Someone who thinks waking up ancient alien minds sounds like a great idea? Maltharek's sensory stalks snapped to attention. You cannot be suggesting we proceed deeper into this facility without backup. I'm suggesting we at least scout the archive. Figure out what we're dealing with, because right now, all we have is one very suspicious recording from dead aliens who thought it was okay to engineer an entire species as meat puppets. That is a grotesque oversimplification. Is it, though? Is it really? They argued for another 5 minutes, but ultimately, they both knew they were going deeper. The same curiosity that made them archaeologists, that drove them to dig through dead civilizations looking for answers, wouldn't let them walk away now. Even if the smart thing, the safe thing, would be to collapse the entrance and pretend they never found this place. The corridor to the archive was longer than the schematic suggested. A gentle downward slope that took them deeper into the planet's crust. More holograms activated as they passed, showing scenes from architect history, glimpses of a civilization in its prime. Cities that made human metropolises look like villages. Technology that bent space-time like origami. Art, music, literature, all of it preserved in perfect digital clarity. They were magnificent, Maltharek whispered, watching a hologram of an architect symphony. No wonder they refused to accept extinction. Magnificence doesn't give you the right to hijack another species, Deacon countered, but his voice lacked heat. He was watching the same hologram, and yeah, okay, it was beautiful. Tragic, even. An entire civilization's last desperate grab at immortality. Still didn't make it right. The archive entrance was sealed behind a door, similar to the first, covered in flowing patterns that pulsed with inner light. But unlike the first door, this one had a warning hologram projected above it. Text in the architect language that Deacon's implant struggled to translate. Beyond this threshold lies transformation. Maltharek read slowly, his voice uncertain. Those who enter as one species may emerge as another. The consciousness matrices await their inheritors. That's not creepy at all. I am increasingly convinced we should retreat and summon proper authorities." Noted and ignored. Deacon approached the door, and just like before, the patterns reacted to his presence. "I need to see this. I need to know if there's any way to undo what they did, or at least understand it." The door opened before he could speak to it, responding to his proximity alone, and that sent a fresh wave of unease through Deacon's gut. This facility knew him, or rather, it knew what he was, the genetic markers and vocal patterns that marked him as an architect creation. The archive was impossibly vast, a chamber so large that the far walls disappeared into haze. And filling that space, arranged in perfect geometric rows, were cylinders. Thousands upon thousands of them, each one glowing with the same blue light that permeated the facility. Each one containing, presumably, an architect mind. "This is obscene," Malthirek breathed. "The power requirements alone to maintain this many consciousness matrices for 10 millennia. He never finished the sentence because that's when they both noticed the empty cylinder. It stood in the front row, its light extinguished, its containment field inactive. And next to it, connected by a web of cables and conduits, was something that definitely hadn't been built by the architects. It was an android body, humanoid, but clearly synthetic. Its chassis open to reveal circuitry that was simultaneously ancient and disturbingly modern. Someone had been modifying it, upgrading it, preparing it. "Someone else has been here," Deacon said quietly. "Recently." "That is impossible. We were the first to enter this facility in—" The android's eyes opened. They were blue, the same shade as the archive lights, and they focused on Deacon with unnerving precision. The chassis closed with a soft hiss, cables detaching, and the android sat up with movements that were too smooth, too natural for something that should have been dormant. "Not the first," the android said, its voice layered with digital artifacts and something underneath that might have been organic once. "But the first who mattered. The first with the right voice pattern." Malthirek had grabbed Deacon and was pulling him backward, but Deacon resisted, staring at the android. At the architect consciousness, wearing a synthetic body like a borrowed coat. "Who are you?" Deacon demanded. "I am called Obrixon. I was a guardian in the time before ending, and I have been waiting here, in this half-existence, for 10,000 years, waiting for you. If you think I'm going to let you jump into my head—" Obrixon laughed, a sound that was probably meant to be reassuring but came out wrong, filtered through synthetic vocal cords. "No, no, that is not how this works. That is not how any of this was meant to work." The android stood, and both Deacon and Malthirek took several steps back. But Obrixon made no aggressive moves, just stood there with an expression that looked almost sad. "The recording you heard was incomplete, corrupted by time, or perhaps by Huldanus's own bitterness. He was never good at accepting defeat." Obrixon gestured at the rows of consciousness matrices. "Yes, we created your species. Yes, we designed you with specific traits. But not as vessels, Deacon. Not as bodies to steal." "Then why?" Deacon's hands were clenched into fists. "Why engineer an entire species, if not to use them?" "Because we needed successors, inheritors. We were dying, and we knew it. And we could not bear the thought of everything we had learned, everything we had discovered, vanishing with us." Obrixon moved closer, and Deacon fought the urge to run. The consciousness matrices were meant as a gift, not a theft. A library of minds you could consult, learn from, choose to integrate with. Voluntary symbiosis, not possession. That's a convenient reinterpretation now that we're actually here. It is the truth. I have no reason to lie. Look around you, Deacon. Look at these matrices. Do you see activation protocols? Do you see forced transfer mechanisms? Obrixon spread its arms wide. I have been here for 10,000 years with the power to begin the process. I have been conscious, aware, while my colleagues slept in digital dreams. I could have activated the beacon, called others of your kind here, attempted what Holdanis imagined, but I did not. Malthirek spoke up, his voice cautious. Why not? Because he was wrong. Because creating a species, guiding their evolution, giving them the tools to inherit the galaxy, that is one thing. Stealing their bodies, overwriting their minds, that would make us monsters. And I have spent 10 millennia alone with that thought, examining it from every angle. And I know which side of that line I stand on. Deacon wanted to believe it. Some part of him, the part that had spent his entire adult life studying dead civilizations and finding beauty in their ruins, wanted desperately to believe that the architects had been better than Holdanis's recording suggested. But he'd also learned to be skeptical of convenient truths. "Prove it," he said. "Prove you're not just saying what I want to hear." Obrixon nodded slowly. "Very well. I will show you the original design specifications, the actual protocols for consciousness integration. You will see that they require explicit consent, that they were built with safeguards against forced transfer, that the entire system was meant to be a choice, not a hijacking." The android moved to a control panel, and new holograms bloomed into existence. Technical specifications, biological schematics, ethical guidelines written in code more complex than anything Deacon had ever seen. And yes, there it was, buried in layers of programming, consent protocols, veto permissions, fail-safes designed to shut down any attempted forced transfer. It could have been a lie. The android could have fabricated the data. But Deacon had spent his entire career learning to read the truth in ancient systems, and this felt genuine. "Why did you wake up?" he asked quietly. "Why not stay dormant like the others?" Someone needed to maintain the facility, to wait, to make sure that if humanity did find us, they understood what we truly meant to give them. Obrixon's expression, filtered through synthetic features, looked tired beyond measure. 10,000 years is a very long time to be alone with your species' sins, Deacon. I wanted to make sure we did this right. The archive hummed around them, 10,000 sleeping minds waiting for a choice they might never get to make. And Deacon realized he was the one who was going to have to decide what happened next. The weight of 10,000 years pressed down on Deacon's shoulders like a physical thing. Here he was, a 31-year-old linguist who'd spent most of his career arguing with colleagues about verb conjugations, suddenly responsible for deciding the fate of an entire civilization's final legacy. "I need to think," he said, his voice coming out rougher than intended. "I need to process this." "You have time," Obrixon said. "I have waited this long. I can wait longer." But even as the android spoke, alarms began blaring through the facility, harsh and discordant. Red warning holograms materialized in the air, displaying text that Deacon's implant translated as "secondary breach detected. Multiple unauthorized entities entering facility perimeter." "Oh, that's just perfect," Deacon muttered, "because this situation wasn't complicated enough." Malthirek was already checking his comm device, his sensory stalks rigid with alarm. "The expedition coordinator has finally responded to my earlier messages. They are sending a full security team. Estimated arrival time, 12 minutes. "Let me guess," Deacon said, watching the security feeds that Obrixon was now displaying. "They're not coming to help us document our findings?" The feeds showed armed personnel descending into the facility, moving with military precision. Leading them was a familiar figure, broad-shouldered and scowling even through the grainy holographic display. "That's Lennox," Deacon said, "head of Expedition Security. He's a good guy, mostly, but he's also extremely paranoid about ancient alien technology that might pose a threat to humanity. An understandable concern, given current revelations," Maltharek pointed out. "Yeah, except he's the kind of paranoid that shoots first and asks questions never. If he finds out about the consciousness matrices—" Deacon trailed off, but they all knew how that sentence ended. Lennox would destroy everything, burn it all down to bedrock, and sleep soundly, knowing he'd eliminated a potential threat. Obrixon tilted its head, an eerily human gesture in a synthetic body. "So you have a choice to make, and less time than anticipated to make it. Do you trust me? Do you trust what the architects tried to create here?" "I don't know," Deacon said honestly. 10 minutes ago, I thought my entire species was designed as a storage solution for dead aliens. Now, you're telling me we're actually inheritors with agency and choice. Forgive me if I'm having trouble with the whiplash." The android nodded slowly. "Then perhaps I can make the choice easier. The archive contains more than just consciousness matrices. It contains every piece of knowledge the architects possessed. Medical advances that could eliminate diseases your species still struggles with. Energy technologies that would make resource scarcity obsolete. The secrets of faster-than-light travel beyond anything the current galaxy has achieved. All of it, freely given, with no strings attached. Except the part where 10,000 alien minds get to hang around in our collective consciousness," Deacon shot back. "Only if individuals choose to integrate them. And even then, the specifications make it clear: symbiosis, not possession. A partnership between two minds, both maintaining their identity. You would not be overwritten, Deacon. You would be expanded." It was a sales pitch, and Deacon knew it. But stars help him. It was a good one. How many problems could humanity solve with that kind of knowledge? How many lives could be saved? And how much could go catastrophically wrong if he was making a mistake? The security feeds showed Lennox's team getting closer, moving through the corridors with weapons drawn. They'd be here in minutes. "Mal," Deacon said quietly, "your opinion? And be honest." The Ondari scholar made that grinding gravel sound again, his entire body tense with indecision. "I am not equipped to make this determination. I am an archaeologist, not a galactic ethicist. But—" he paused, mandibles clicking rapidly. "But I have spent my entire career studying dead civilizations, trying to understand what they knew, what they thought, what wisdom died with them, and if there is even a possibility that this could be genuine knowledge sharing, genuine inheritance, rather than invasion." He didn't finish, but Deacon heard what he wasn't saying. The opportunity was too massive to simply destroy out of fear. "However," Maltharek added quickly, "I also believe in extreme caution. Perhaps a middle path exists?" "Always the diplomat," Deacon said, but his mind was already racing through possibilities. A middle path, something between complete trust and total destruction. He turned back to Obrixon. "The consciousness matrices. Can they be moved? Stored somewhere else? Somewhere we can study them properly? Figure out if integration is actually safe before anyone tries it?" The android's expression shifted, something that might have been respect crossing its synthetic features. "Yes, the matrices are modular, designed to be transportable. But removing them will trigger the facility's self-destruct sequence. The architects built in safeguards to prevent partial theft of their legacy." Either all the knowledge is preserved, or none of it. Of course they did, Deacon muttered, because nothing about this situation could be straightforward. The alarms grew louder, and now they could hear actual footsteps echoing through the corridors. Lennox's team was almost here. Deacon closed his eyes, thinking faster than he'd ever thought in his life. The architects had created humanity, designed them with specific traits, guided their evolution across 10,000 years. That was a violation of autonomy on a scale that made his skin crawl. But they'd also apparently built in safeguards, consent protocols, genuine choice. And they were offering knowledge that could change everything. But could he trust them? Could he trust Obrixon? Could he trust his own judgment when he'd only learned about this situation 20 minutes ago? "I have a counter-proposal," Deacon said, opening his eyes and meeting the android's gaze. "You said the knowledge is freely given. Prove it. Give humanity access to the technological database, the medical advances, all the practical information. But the consciousness matrices stay locked, dormant. We take the knowledge, but we don't take the minds." Obrixon was silent for a long moment, and Deacon couldn't read the expression on that synthetic face. Then the android said quietly, "That would mean true death for my species. Digital sleep was meant to be temporary, but if the matrices remain locked indefinitely, then the architects die, for real this time." "Yeah." Deacon's voice was steady, though his hands were shaking. "I'm sorry. I genuinely am. But I can't make the choice to potentially compromise human autonomy, no matter how good the safeguards look on paper. If individual humans, in the future, with full information, want to attempt integration, that's their choice. But I won't be the one who opens that door." The footsteps were getting closer. Voices now, Lennox shouting orders to his team. Maltharek put one hand on Deacon's shoulder. "It is a reasonable compromise." "It is a death sentence," Obrixon said, but there was no anger in its voice, only sadness, ancient and deep. "But perhaps it is the death sentence we earned. We created you without your consent. Perhaps it is only fair that you should have the final say in our survival." The android moved to the central control panel, hands dancing across holographic interfaces with practiced ease. "The knowledge transfer will take approximately 90 seconds. The facility will then seal itself permanently. The matrices will remain in digital suspension, neither alive nor truly dead, until such time as humanity decides what to do with them." "That's not," Deacon started, but Obrixon cut him off. "It is enough. It has to be enough. We gambled on creating successors, and you have chosen to be your own species, rather than an extension of ours. That is, perhaps, the greatest success we could have hoped for." Data began flowing, incomprehensible streams of information being copied, transmitted, stored in the facility's buffer systems where it could be retrieved safely. Medical knowledge, engineering specifications, astronomical data, cultural archives. 10,000 years of accumulated wisdom being handed over freely, with no strings attached. Lennox burst into the archive, weapon drawn, 5 security personnel behind him. He took one look at the scene. Deacon, Maltharek, the android, the endless rows of glowing cylinders, and his face went pale. "Step away from the alien technology," he barked. "Now! That's an order." "Relax, Lennox," Deacon said, surprised by how calm his own voice sounded. "We're not activating anything dangerous. We're actually preventing something dangerous. Probably. The jury's still out. I don't care what you think you're preventing. This entire facility is a threat to human—" The transfer completed, and every cylinder in the archive went dark simultaneously. The blue glow that had permeated the facility faded, replaced by the harsh white light of emergency systems. Obrixon's android body slumped, the consciousness within retreating back into its matrix, choosing dormancy over conflict. The vault's systems initiated their final protocol. Doors began sealing, corridors collapsing with controlled precision. The facility was putting itself to sleep, perhaps forever. "We need to leave," Malthirek said urgently. "Immediately." They ran, all of them, security team included, racing through corridors as they sealed behind them. Deacon's lungs burned, his legs screaming with effort. But he kept moving because stopping meant being buried under 1 billion tons of rock and ancient regret. They made it to the surface shaft with seconds to spare, climbing up as the entire structure groaned and settled beneath them. When they finally pulled themselves out onto the surface of Aldaris 9, the rectangular opening was already collapsing inward, stone and metal flowing like water to seal the breach. Deacon lay on his back in the orange dust, staring up at the alien sky, chest heaving. "So," Lennox said, standing over him with an expression that promised many, many debriefing sessions in his immediate future. "Want to explain what just happened?" Deacon started laughing, couldn't help it, the sound bubbling up from somewhere deep and slightly unhinged. "We just inherited the galaxy, turned down the chance to bring back an ancient civilization, and maybe, possibly, did the right thing. In that order." He sat up, looking at the sealed ground where the vault had been. Somewhere down there, Obrixon slept, along with 9,999 other architect minds, waiting for a decision humanity wasn't ready to make. Maybe someday they would be. Maybe someday, with full knowledge and genuine choice, humans would decide to wake the architects up. Or maybe they'd leave them sleeping forever. A memorial to a species that tried to cheat death and ended up creating something new instead. Either way, it was humanity's choice now. And Deacon, for all his doubts and fears, thought that was probably how it should be. "Well," he said, accepting Maltharek's offered hand and pulling himself to his feet, "at least we didn't end up as zombie puppets. That's a win in my book." Lennox stared at him like he'd lost his mind. Which, fair, he probably had. But somewhere in his communication implant, a data packet was waiting. 10,000 years of architect knowledge, freely given, no strings attached. The inheritance they'd actually wanted to leave. Not bad for a day's work, digging up dead civilizations. Not bad at all.